There we go. All right, folks, we will get started very shortly. Thank you all for joining us. And as Jason said, we are now streaming to YouTube. Okay. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. This is Supervisor Kenny Boddye, Occoquan District Supervisor, and tonight we will be holding our Racial Healing and Justice Virtual Town Hall. I am joined tonight by Christy Blackman of the Prince William NAACP, who serves on both our Criminal Justice Committee as well as our Legal Redress Committee. Raul Torres, who is the Executive Director of the Prince William County Human Rights Commission. Tracy Lennox Esquire, the new Chief Public Defender for Prince William County, and last but not least, Major Don Harman of the Prince William County Police Department. Thank you all for joining us tonight. What we're going to do first, before we sort of dive into our deep discussion here, is just have everyone sort of just go around, introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their involvement in the community and where they see sort of some of the little fissures and things that we're seeing right now, and what they think we can do to move forward and heal. So, Christy, let's start with you.
Hi, I'm Christy Blackman again. I serve on the executive committee with the Prince William branch of the NAACP. And I also, and with that position, we do the business of our branch, as well as I serve on the Legal Redress Committee, where that's where we receive complaints from the community, and we go about, we investigate those complaints to determine what type of solutions that we will be able to help with the people. And obviously those complaints have to do around discrimination. I am honored to be here with you, Supervisor Boddye. Just a little bit about NAACP. Everyone knows we are, or I should say some of folks know, and maybe folks will know now, that NAACP is the largest and oldest civil rights organization in the country. And the Prince William branch wishes to continue to its mission of advocacy on behalf of the community to remove barriers of racial discrimination. And we do that through the democratic process. As far as with the racial reconciliation, it's this movement that has taken place in the last couple of months has been very essential in the history of our country. And I believe that by us moving forward and recognizing what racism is in this country, what white supremacy is in this country, is going to help us move us in the right direction. And I think just the acknowledgement and the recognition that it exists is the key, because unfortunately there are many people in our country, to include in leadership, that wants to continue to dismiss the idea that racism and white supremacy does not exist. And we know that that is a false narrative, and we know that that is not true. But I'm grateful that we are in a situation tonight with under Supervisor Boddye's leadership to have an honest conversation discussion around justice reform and racial reconciliation. Thank you for having me.
Of course, and thank you for participating. Obviously, as you said, the NAACP here in Prince William does a lot of great work, and you all very involved in making sure that, you know, a lot of these issues of injustice, especially from a racial perspective, are highlighted and really addressed. So thank you so much for your service in that regard. Major Harman, you're up next.
Hi there, good evening. My name is Dawn Harman. I'm one of the assistant chiefs in the Prince William County Police Department, and I'll celebrate my 29th year working for Prince William County this fall. I am a native of Prince William County, having lived here 50 years. And so I've watched this community change and grow over my lifetime. I look forward to engaging in conversations such as this and meaningful dialogue so that we can move our agency forward and try to be the best that we can be while conducting our law enforcement duties through a shared responsibility with the public. And we really look for those partnerships. So I hope that this leads to some more of those. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Major Harman. Thank you for participating, and thank you to all your years of service to our community. We really appreciate it. Mr. Torres, you are up next. And I believe you muted. Raul, I believe you are muted still.
All right, yes. Okay, now I'm up. My name is Raul Torres. I'm the Executive Director of the Human Rights Commission, and I'm an attorney by profession. I also a resident of the Occoquan district in here. So my supervisor is Supervisor Boddye. The Human Rights Commission is a law enforcement agency because we enforce anti-discrimination laws in the private sector and with the Prince William County government too. People come to our offices when they perceive that they have been discriminated against in a number of areas. Those areas are generally employment, housing, education, public accommodations, and private education too, and real estate. So if people believe that they have been discriminated in any of those areas and they belong to a protected class, which generally is race, sex, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, etc., they can come to our office. We do an investigation and render a decision. But beyond that, we in the Human Rights Commission advise the Board of County Supervisors on issues of civil rights. If there are concerns in the community and issues in the community, we deal with those issues as a commission. Commissioners are 9 citizens of Prince William County, appointed for 3-year terms. On top of that, I'm the lead staff that is working on an equity and inclusion initiative that is going to result in a equity and inclusion policy for Prince William County that will assess every program, service, and policy that we have with equity lenses, meaning with lenses information that would let us know who is affected by our decisions, who benefits from our decisions, and who participates in our decisions. So that's another aspect of my job. Plus, on top of that, I'm working with the Board of Supervisors in providing some alternatives to create a racial justice task force that will go and do a deep dive on issues of racial equity and systemic racism in 3 major areas. The areas would be policing, education, and the provision of government services. So that's something we will consider in August 4th at their August 4th meeting, together with other resolutions that have to do with the same subject matter. So I'm really hard, like everybody else, to take the environment in Prince William, move this county in the right direction, as the late John Lewis said, or creating the good trouble, not the bad one, but the good trouble, the one that will lead us into equity.
Thank you so much, Mr. Torres. Thank you for all the work you're currently doing. I appreciate the fact that you brought up the task force, because that is coming before us this coming Tuesday. We're going to be looking at those different alternatives and ways to start tackling these issues. Mr. Torres also serves as an alternate on our regional jail board. So it's really great to have someone who has that equity, human rights lens serving in so many different capacities. Especially one who's one of our constituents here in the Occoquan district. So I appreciate that as well. That said, last but not least, Ms. Lennox, take it away. I think you may also be muted.
I know better. I know better. Sorry about that. So the most current job that I hold that I think is most relevant for this panel is that I am the new chief of the newly created Prince William County Public Defender's Office. And this is an office that is created by the community, by community request and agitation and lobbying. If it weren't for Voice and a variety of other community organizations, my office wouldn't exist. They've been lobbying for it for decades. Finally, just in the last couple of years, with the change in sentiment and approach and focus of the legislature, as well as the support of our Board of County Supervisors, the Public Defender's Office has been created and supported in a way that will make us, I hope, successful going forward. So I'm the new chief of that office. Just getting it off the ground. I have to hire 35 people in the next month and a half, and there's a lot of things to do. So, but that's the original thing, is that the Public Defender's Office obviously represents, our motto is that we're going to diligently and zealously represent and compassionately represent indigent defendants, both their integrity and their values and their rights in Prince William County. So that's our mission going forward. In addition to that, I serve as one of the new members of the jail board. I am a newly appointed member of the Community Criminal Justices Board. I have been for several years a member of the Prince William County Regional Adult Detention Center's Evidence-Based Decision-Making Board, whose goal is both to reduce recidivism, but also to reduce the jail population and to reduce the need for carceral solutions to the criminal justice system problem. So those are all of the sort of hats that I wear on a daily basis. I'm also the current president of the Prince William County Bar Association, which represents roughly 500 members of the bar, civil, criminal, transactional, throughout Prince William County. So the things that I think are important for me to bring forward in this discussion are that I have been engaged in the community of Prince William trying to forward criminal justice reform issues for years now. That includes everything from, because we've had some questions about this, reducing the use of cash bonds, getting people that are incarcerated out as quickly as they possibly can that don't pose a risk to their community, and are likely to appear in court. Reducing the use of carceral solutions when mental health and substance abuse are the driving force behind criminal activity. Partnering with our law enforcement officers so that they are not called upon to do things in our community that might be, if not better done, more in a more nuanced way, dealing with mental health issues, dealing with other things like that in the community as a companion to law enforcement where needed. And then beyond that, I also have been, as a criminal defense attorney, my passion is the representation of people that are charged with crimes, and especially the indigent members of our community, which are predominantly Black and brown people in our community who have needed to have a voice. And in even the most recent charges that stemmed out of protests that happened outside of the McCourt building, I was, I spent hours making sure those folks had representation from the first 24 hours, so that we can, the community, they have a voice in all of this. So I think that's why I'm here. I think that's why Supervisor Boddye invited me. I'm really excited about this conversation, and I thank you for inviting me here to participate in it.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lennox. We appreciate all the work you've been doing thus far, even before becoming the Chief Public Defender, but you encapsulate a lot of why it's so important that we have a Public Defender's Office in Prince William County. It's been a long time coming. I was proud to make sure that we got into our lobbying efforts this year, and even more proud providing that 15% supplement to make sure that your folks that you're going to be hiring are the top talent to be competitive in the region, because it's important that we have, it's one of our constitutional rights. People the laws, and that's what we're here to provide. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
So with that, I'm going to first with some of the questions that we received ahead of time. Ms. Lex, you actually already talked about it, but I'll jump into it. About the county's bail bond system. How many people are in jail awaiting trial because they could not pay bail, especially those who were arrested for insignificant nonviolent crimes or for property damage? How long on average are people arrested in trial? And are there times when they spend more time in trial than they would be given by the judge if there is a jury of guilty? Is there a class of people who offer bail in the first place for the same alleged crime? Also, who decides who gets released on paid bail? No charge. Is there a schedule of costs? Please add another question I haven't thought. Okay, so a huge question. And it just basically obviously gets to the heart of what you were talking about, where unfortunately our criminal justice system in many ways is set up to criminalize being poor. You know, those folks that are not really threats to public safety are held in the bail bond system and they can't get out simply because they don't have enough. So since we talked about it, Tracy, let's start with you.
Sure. So here's where I can give some good news to Prince William County. The Evidence-Based Decision-Making Board, which is run by some of you may find this ironic. It's run by our jail. It's run by the Adult Detention Center. It's Prince William County, and I have lots of information. If people have curiosity about this, email me. I'll give you all the information you want about the basis and the premises of this board. But they undertook to figure out ways that we could reduce our jail population while also maintaining increasing low recidivism rates. And one of the targets became cash bond, because it was discerned very early on that we had people incarcerated who had cash bonds required, who were going to lose jobs. As a result, families would suffer from that, and they would lose jobs. Their families would be on the receiving end of that, and they were not actually, when you look at the two considerations, which are they going to show up for court and are they a risk to our community, their actual risk levels were very low. And this happens a lot with people that are low income all over the United States. This happens a lot. These are the people that are held, but there's actually no indication that they won't come to court or that they're going to be a risk to the community. So this was considered kind of low-hanging fruit for this board over the course of years, a year to 2 years of collecting data about exactly what this person is asking about. Who's held? Are they actually a risk to reoffend? Are they being held on nonviolent crimes? Are they, what are the data about all of this? Before, the data was actually very bad and indicated that we had 30 to 40% of the folks that were coming into the jail were not getting released in such a way that they could get back to their jobs, they could get back to being productive, but they didn't need to be held. And so a series of things took place. I was happy to say I was in the middle of a lot of that, where we created tools that we now use in Prince William County to assess the risk. We then, we put that out to the judges who then make those decisions. We also, the next step was to get an attorney physically present at the first appearance of these folks so that they're not without an advocate the first time they come in front of a judge if they're being held. They now have an advocate at that initial hearing. The public defender will step into that. I helped create the program, and now the public defender is going to step in and do it. And now our numbers are, and I will get these numbers if people are interested. We don't have the most recent numbers because of COVID. So we've been unable to meet as an EBDM board until just a couple of days ago. And so I don't have good numbers, but our numbers have reduced in terms of the current population of people held after they come into the jail by like 50%. So that number of people that are indigent that are being held on property crimes is almost down to zero. The number of indigent that are being held on drug crimes, largely misdemeanor drug crimes or non-distribution drug crimes, almost down to zero. The folks that are coming in now, we still have a little bit of a gap where the magistrate system is, because the magistrate is the initial person to set a bond or not set a bond, and we still haven't gotten complete buy-in from the magistrates about not setting these cash bonds in the first place, but they typically are going to be the next morning in front of a judge, and 75% of the people coming in front of a judge who the bond paperwork says they're not posing a risk, they don't even require any bond. They may be on pretrial services, meaning they got to check in, they got to do some things there, but typically are not being required to post a bond anymore. Cash bond in Prince William County, and I need to give credit also to Amy Ashworth as the new Commonwealth's attorney. Amy and I disagree about a lot of stuff. She's not where I want her to be on a lot of things. I think she'd agree with that, but we would also agree that on very important things like the issue of cash bonds, Amy has kept to her campaign promises about this. She doesn't believe that cash bonds are necessary in most cases, and she's given directives to her Commonwealth's attorneys to not ask for it. So now we're in this weird situation where I'm arguing against it. Amy's, Ms. Ashworth's attorneys are not requesting it, and the judge is still doing it. So now we've switched to a place where it's really more the judicial officer that we've got to change their mind about it. But I can report that cash bonds are diminished in Prince William County by, I think I'm right about this, 75%. Like, it is dramatic where we are on cash bonds in Prince William County. We still have work to do. That's a defense attorney talking. We still have work to do on this. But yeah, cash bonds are diminished dramatically. Prince William has gotten it right. Our Commonwealth's attorney's gotten it right, and we're putting in place things like the PD's office that will be advocating early and often for our indigent community to get them out. Sorry, that was super long-winded. And now you're muted, Kenny.
All right, can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I switched audio because I got reports that my audio through my computer was sort of coming in and out, so I decided to switch to my phone. I hope that's a little bit better for everyone listening. So thank you for that, Tracy. That was very comprehensive, but that's part of the reason why we wanted to have you on here. We appreciate you working with our Commonwealth's attorney, Amy Ashworth, to really push these things forward. Christy, did you have anything you wanted to add to that by chance?
No, I just one slight emphasis, and Tracy did mention this, but many of the people that are in jail, they're in there, and the reason why is because it's for lack of financial resources. And so, it's not because that there are flight risk or anything like that. So the fact that Prince William County has shaped their program where they're not requiring for folks to sit in jail because they can't afford to bail themselves out, that's a significant win for the county. And I say kudos for all the hard work that was done to make that happen, because people should not sit in jail because of finances.
Absolutely agreed with that. Thank you for that, Christy. Mr. Torres, anything you would like to add on your end? And I think you're muted.
We're all muted until we start talking.
All right.
I can't say much about this as an attorney that for a long time was in private practice and did criminal practice. What Tracy exposed there is very significant and a great change. You shouldn't be in jail just because you cannot post bond, just because you're a low-income person and don't have the money. For the same charge that you have, if you had the money, you would be out. So that shouldn't be any requisite for one of those that. But as Tracy said, there are different elements that have to buy in here, starting with the magistrate that imposed that first bond. And magistrates don't even have to be attorneys and at all, though. So they pretty much do whatever they want at that initial circumstance. And it is not until you go actually to a judge and 24 hours later that you have a real chance, to change the situation. But I think that we're doing a lot better than many other jurisdictions in terms of cash bonds, but we have to keep at it. So judges, magistrates, and everybody else buy into it.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Mr. Torres. Major Harman, did you have anything you wanted to add to this conversation at all?
I think the police department doesn't have any input as far as bond. So I will cede any answers to those that have already spoken.
No, absolutely. I just wanted to check to make sure. Thank you for that. So our next question is something that we will be able to start with you, Major Harman. It is, with all the attention on police, what are we doing to hold offenders responsible for their actions and sort of suitable punishment? And I think that this question is couched in the idea that obviously, both locally, but especially throughout the country, we're seeing a lot of energy behind some of the demonstrations. And we also know there are some bad actors that may be trying to co-opt the movement that we're in right now to cause some damage and destruction and really do a disservice to folks who are legitimately protesting some of the things that we've seen. So Major Harman, could you talk about how some folks are being held accountable when they're found to be breaking the law during some of these demonstrations, especially when it comes to looting, property, vandalism, those sorts of things?
Sure. I wasn't quite sure what the question meant by offenders, if they were talking about internal investigations, but you've clarified that for me, so I appreciate that. We approach each situation independent of another. So for example, on May 30th, we had the first of many different protests that began in Manassas. And the way that we approach any situation is we simply look at the facts. So if we have an allegation of an offense, somebody has broken the law, we conduct an investigation each and every time. So we interview witnesses, we interview the complainant, we interview an accused, if we know who that might be. Many times regarding the issues that have come about, we don't have anybody that remains on the scene. So we have to do a little bit more legwork. That may involve reviewing security videos from nearby establishments. And many times it is when we begin our investigation and our officers turn on their body-worn camera. It also includes a review of a body-worn camera footage. So once depending on the set of circumstances, some arrests are made what we consider to be on view, meaning the officer is presented or investigates and determines a set of facts that have occurred, has reasonable or probable cause to believe that a law has been broken, and then for certain crimes, an officer may make an on-view arrest. That means without an arrest warrant in hand. And many times that is for crimes that are occurring in their presence that they have witnessed. Other times, officers have to respond to the magistrate's office and fill out a probable cause statement. And then a magistrate, who is a trier of fact, determines whether or not they believe that what the officer has articulated rises to the level of probable cause to believe that a person may have committed that offense, and therefore issues an arrest warrant, and then we make the arrest. But to close the loop on your question, I think for each instance where we have a complaint that a violation of the law may have occurred, we conduct an independent investigation, and that can be very short or very long, depending on the type of crime that is alleged or that is witnessed. So I hope that answers your question.
It does, absolutely. Thank you for that, Major Harman. And it looks like there was a clarification in the chat over on YouTube about the nature of the question, but I think it was still something that needed to be answered. And so it looks like the individual who asked the question was more targeted towards me as an elected official and condemning the folks that have been doing the looting and the vandalism. And what I would say to that is we have been doing that. About a month ago, I actually authored a resolution that was passed unanimously by the Board of Supervisors, which condemned two things that I think are very important in this conversation. One is police brutality, And while that isn't to say there's any instances of police brutality necessarily in Prince William County, we thought it was important to show that we do not condone that kind of behavior. But two, more to the point, we also mentioned the vandalism, the destruction of property, and a lot of the rioting that we've seen in other places. And we condemned that as well, because we know that folks have high tensions right now. We know that they're angry, and rightfully so. But when we start to destroy other people's property, you know, it begins to not only distract from the movement that we're in right now, but it brings people in who had nothing to do with what's happening. And that's something that we should not condone as elected officials or as the public at large. So we have made statements, especially through that resolution that I passed, that we say unequivocally that folks, as they practice their First Amendment rights, they should not be destroying or vandalizing the property of others or stealing those. So I hope that answers your question more directly. I didn't know if anyone else wanted to speak on this issue, Christy, Tracy, or Mr. Torres.
Well, I'll just say, if by chance you are in a situation where you feel like there was some sort of police misconduct while you are protesting and you feel as if you've been discriminated against or profiled, the Prince William branch of NAACP is here to help. And so you please feel free to reach out to us. You can do that by way of going to our website, click on contact us, and you can fill out a complaint online, or you can actually call us. We have a phone number, and I'll go ahead and give the phone number. So it's 571-357-3008. So please feel free. You know, one part of our democracy, parts of it, one specific is accountability. So yes, Prince William County Police is great. But just in case there's any type of issues and you feel like you're being discriminated against, please contact us and we will try to help resolve the issue for you, or at least advocate on your behalf.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Christy. Mr. Torres, did you have something to add?
I just wanted to clarify that, unfortunately, the way our ordinance is written, being in a protest is not a protected activity for filing complaints of discrimination. This is not employment or housing or one of the protected activities that you have to be engaged in order to have the protection of the ordinance. But if it is something that is systemic and it's something that is happening, you know, with certain frequency, we can investigate. The Human Rights Commission can investigate it as a matter of civil rights and advise the board about it. But we cannot take direct complaints because it is not a protected activity under the ordinance.
Absolutely, and thank you for that clarity, Mr. Torres. Obviously, there's different lanes where folks can go to the NAACP, for example, but obviously under our human rights ordinance of the county, that's not a protected thing, unless, you know, as you said, there's an egregious sort of systemic issue there. Ms. Lennox, let's wrap it up with you. Did you have anything to add to this? And you are muted, just in case you are talking.
Bless me. Sorry about that. That's a good thing to mute, but then I forget. No, I really have nothing to add over what other folks have said about this. Thank you.
Can I just jump in real quick?
Sure, absolutely. Go for it.
So Christy's point made me think of one other thing that I think is important, is that if you feel that you have been mistreated, please lodge a complaint, whether it's through our Office of Professional Standards, whether it's through Prince William County, whether it's through the NAACP, whether it's through the Human Rights Commission, whatever you feel most comfortable as your venue. But what I would ask of folks is that the conversation is appropriate leading up to the point where an officer says you are under arrest. So what we would ask is that once you have been told you are under arrest, we would ask for your compliance with that officer carrying out his or her duties at the time. The time for conversation and to debate the issue is not there. That's what the criminal justice system is for. That's what Tracy's group is for the court system to carry out. But if you wish to lodge a complaint, please do so, but not at the time when you're under arrest. The officer must carry out their duties to effect that arrest at that time. So thanks.
Kenny, we can't hear you.
Unmute yourself.
Sorry, thank you for that, Major Harman. Did anyone have anything else to add to that before we moved on? All right.
I'll just say, as a criminal defense lawyer, that you're really going to be better off if you comply with Officer Harman's suggestion that once they've articulated that you're under arrest, their job description frankly changes in some very significant ways, and it's going to be harder rather than easier in terms of what's going to happen to you next. Not to say that you won't have remedies, and we'll explore every one of those for you. But yeah, their job changes, and you're better off in terms of what happens next to just comply. You don't have to. Well, I'll leave it at that.
Sure. Thank you for that. So we had a couple questions that came up through the chat, and they've been answered, but just so folks who may be listening and not looking at the chat, one of the questions was in regards to the role of 35 folks that Ms. Lennox is going to be hiring for her office. And she's replied, 24 attorneys, 2 investigators, 2 mitigation specialists, 2 paralegals, and 5 admin staff. And again, I just wanted to reinforce, from our perspective as a Board of Supervisors, we did provide that 15% supplement for her office this year, which will help achieve that good parity between the public defender's office and the prosecutor that they're going to be working with. The next question was in regards to the qualifications of the magistrate, since, as was said earlier, they don't have to be an attorney. And Ms. Lennox put in the actual Virginia Code section, which is 19.2-37. Tracy, did you actually just want to read it, since it's just a couple sentences?
Of course, sure. I'm happy to do that. So the qualifications are found in Virginia Code. So this is set by our legislature. They say what the magistrate's qualifications have to be. And the person has to be a U.S. citizen and a resident of the Commonwealth of Virginia. Beyond that, as of 2008, they also have to have a bachelor's degree. Prior to that, obviously, didn't have to have that bachelor's degree. There are disqualifications from being a magistrate. Those are the only qualifications. But the disqualifications are things like they can't be a law enforcement officer. They can't be related to a judge. They can't be related to a clerk of the court. There's a couple of other things there that I think are more minor. The biggest one, obviously, is they can't be law enforcement. The move towards requiring a bachelor's degree was a major increase in qualifications for the magistrate. But we've also, I want to be as politic about this as I can, but the new magistrate, and Mr. Torres, you may remember her name. It's Devin, or how about you? I don't know. Does anybody remember her last name? It's Devin something. The new chief magistrate has a very different perspective on things like cash bond and things like the sorts of things that we care about here. The magistrate that's currently become the chief is quite different. And I think that we're going to see a move in the direction of the sorts of things that we care about that start at the magistrate's level, like requiring cash bond that we didn't have in Prince William County 6 months ago. And so I'm optimistic as a defense attorney that some of the difficulty, the sort of banging my head against a wall that was happening with the magistrates, who are governed by the Virginia Supreme Court. They're not governed by the Board of County Supervisors. They're not even governed by the legislature. They're governed by the Virginia Supreme Court. Some of that's going to be changing, I think, in Prince William County, because we have a new chief magistrate who has the same sort of, at least some of the same priorities that we do for criminal justice reform.
Absolutely. And I think it was Devin Kirk, maybe. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that sounds right. And I feel if she's listening, I'm sorry. I can't remember your last name. I met her for the first time 2 nights ago. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. So since Major Harman, you touched upon this earlier when you referenced that very first protest that we had in the county back on May 30th. Could you sort of dig a little bit into, I don't necessarily we need to talk about the situation completely, But in terms of the roles between our local PD and say the state police, because we know that the state police stepped in to help out our officers during that. And can you talk a little bit about the collaboration and how how those relationships work?
Sure. We have something called mutual aid agreements with other local law enforcement agencies and the Virginia State Police. And it is for those events which may exhaust our available resources at the time. So as you know, we are authorized over 700 officers on our department. However, they're not all working at the same time. And so when we become aware, sometimes we can pre-plan events. For example, the national election. We can say, we know there's going to be a large turnout, and we can adjust staff's work schedules accordingly so that we have appropriate resources in place to handle the number of calls for service that we can predict that we will have based on previous experience. There are situations, however, that quickly deplete our resources and require us to reach out for mutual aid. On May 30th, two different sets of circumstances happened. One, we were receiving intelligence from Northern Virginia groups that said that there was going to be an event. And we were also receiving additional intelligence that other actors may come into play somewhere in the Northern Virginia area and try to disrupt peaceful protests. And so as a result, the Virginia State Police deployed different platoons of their civil disturbance units to different locations throughout the state so that they could rapidly respond to wherever an event might erupt. So because of our location in Northern Virginia, we're kind of a good place where they could stage and be ready to respond for an incident in Alexandria, Fairfax, Arlington, Falls Church, Loudoun, and along that 66 corridor. So we had Virginia State Police staged up there with the intelligence that we were getting based on what we were seeing nationally and then the information that was coming in with potential disruptions in the area. So they were staged. In addition, once the events turned a little more violent and we observed lots of crimes being committed, we reached out to Fairfax County Police and asked for mutual aid assistance for additional officers to respond to the Sudley area in that way. So we have a written memorandum of understanding with other local law enforcement agencies that says, hey, if you need our assistance, these are the participating agencies and their chiefs have agreed to provide this many resources. And conversely, if we need it, then you'll do the same for us. So that's kind of what came into play on May 30th. We had that Virginia State contingent already staged because of intelligence that was coming in. So that was a bit of a pre-planning staged event. And then we had the call for mutual aid to Fairfax County to ask for additional resources, as well as our sheriff's department and some other law enforcement agencies to assist us with what we were witnessing out there in Sudley.
Thank you for that, Major Harman. And I asked that question so folks know that sometimes when some of these issues are happening, especially when demonstrations, when the law enforcement are given intel to issues that are happening, it's not just Prince William PD who is responding to some of these demonstrations. Sometimes, as she said, we have other jurisdictions, PD, such as Fairfax, Arlington, Alexandria. Sometimes we have the state police come in. So it makes things a lot more complicated when folks believe there might be incidents that happen, especially if there are some tensions between the law enforcement presence and the demonstrators, because it's not always just Prince William PD who are responding to things. And like with anything, I'll just say it this way, just as every community is different, the culture and community of every law enforcement office is a little bit different. Obviously, they have a lot of the same standards and ideals and things like that, but because we really take pride in having our law enforcement represent the values of our community, they're not always going to be completely aligned with all of the same ways in which other law enforcement agencies are going to engage with residents. So I wanted to highlight that to make sure the folks out there know that there's going to be issues where folks may not interact with the law enforcement agencies in quite the same way if they are dealing with the same agency. That being said, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that, Major Harman?
I just wanted to say, you know, we, as Colonel Phelps has stated before, we assume ultimate responsibility for anything that happens here in Prince William County as far as law enforcement agencies. We asked for their help, whether it be, you know, because something is breaking or because we've exhausted our resources. And so we assume that responsibility, and we appreciate the fact that they are willing to come out and help us to keep our community safe, because ultimately that's our charge. Enforce the law and keep the community safe. And so we appreciate what Virginia State Police had, you know, offered, and we appreciate Fairfax County, our Prince William County Sheriff's Office, and some of those other folks that were out there helping us, because we still had to have a group of officers available to respond to citizens' calls in the Central District and as well as the Eastern District. So we couldn't send all of our resources to Manassas, because we still have a duty to make sure the rest of our jurisdiction is covered in case another emergency should break. And it doesn't even have to be related to that. It could have been a shooting, or it could have been, you know, a call of a burglary or something like that. We still need to handle those calls. Everything doesn't stop just because we have a very large event that breaks in a particular area in the county. So thank you for the opportunity to discuss that.
No, I appreciate that. And that's important to remember, because obviously we want everyone to be able to exercise their First Amendment rights peacefully. But that does take law enforcement resources to make sure that everyone's being safe, you know, both the folks that are going to be around the periphery of these demonstrations, but also especially the demonstrators themselves. And that takes additional manpower that isn't usually provided day to day in other places. So thank you for adding that. Christy, Mr. Torres, or Tracy, did you guys have anything that you guys wanted to add to that?
Sure, I would like to add something to that. So I think one of the great challenges facing us in criminal justice reform going forward right now is based on these mutual aid agreements. It is and I should say, by way of full disclosure, you know, I'm married to a retired Prince William County police officer. These are conversations I've been having for 30 years at home in my household. I recognize, probably not in the way that Captain Harman does, but I recognize the role that mutual aid agreements play in the local police department's ability to provide this we employ them to do, to keep us safe, to respond to our needs. Having said that, there has been, I believe, I'll just say it. I believe that there's been a breach of trust from national law enforcement in Prince William County, or the potential for it. There's been a breach of trust in other local jurisdictions around the country. I don't have any reason to say that. Because it was clearly under color of law. So let me retract that. National law enforcement has shown itself to be unreliable, in my opinion, in terms of the communities that they have mutual trust agreements in. Maybe not with the law enforcement in those communities, but they have not shown themselves to understand the communities that they're in, to interact with those communities in a respectful way. And it's not the fault of local law enforcement that that's happening. But I believe that there's a risk to us in the county. This is a conversation we're going to have to continue to have over the next several months. It manifested itself in the jail board decision to not renew 287G. Because we felt that we lost trust in our national law enforcement, specifically in the Department of Homeland Security, Customs and Border Patrol Enforcement, and ICE. And so the jail board, of which Mr. Torres and I are both members, said, we don't want those that particular law enforcement of federal agencies engaged in our local law enforcement structure anymore. it's still up for grabs how deep that's going to go. We're still in a battle over that. We have agreed that it's important to gather data about this in order to make sure that we're making the right decision for this county about what our regional jail ought to be doing cooperatively with law enforcement on the federal level. Recognize the deep experience of enforcement like Captain Harman and others in Prince William County, but there's a deep skepticism about the role that federal law enforcement ought to be playing in Prince William County. I don't believe they know this community the way Prince William County PD does. I don't know that I can trust them to respect this community the way I know Prince William County PD does. I know they will not be as accountable to the community as our local law enforcement has demonstrated themselves to be for decades. Our Prince William County PD has been accountable to us in ways that I don't think we can ever count on the federal government to do. And I think that one of the hard things we're going to have to deal with in the coming years probably is the degree to which we continue to say to our local law enforcement, continue as usual, interact with enforcement in the same way, it's all good. I'm skeptical. I'm a defense attorney, so I get it. I have one perspective. But I am very skeptical of whether I can ever trust Customs and Border Patrol the way I trust the officers sitting in this round table.
But I'll add to that and say it's a lot of work for Prince William PD to have to deal with, because oftentimes the community does not understand the differences between local police and federal police. And so when word gets out on the street that police, and it could be ICE, is in the community, they don't distinguish the two. So, you know, obviously Major Harman can speak on that, but I just think it becomes a trust issue within the community when you have all these different type of law enforcement, and a lot of people, they don't see the differences. So
I will say that here in the Prince William County Police Department, we very much recognize that people see a uniform and we are all the same. We wouldn't be having these discussions. We wouldn't have the protests if that weren't the case, because people would say, oh, well, that was Minneapolis. Our Prince William County Police Department hasn't done anything. And so we know that you're not all the same, but we all wear a uniform with a badge. And so it doesn't matter if you work at the ADC. It doesn't matter if you work for the Prince William County Police Department, Fairfax County, Virginia State. If you work for an agency in Florida, if you work for an agency in California, Portland, Oregon, wherever you want to name, we all recognize in law enforcement that we're all accountable for each other. And the misdeeds of one impact us all. And we've known that for a long time. I'm going to push back on you a little bit, Tracy, and you shouldn't be surprised by that. But you may have concerns about certain federal agencies. But I would caution against painting a broad brush and saying we need to review all MOUs and we don't trust our federal partners, because the FBI assists us greatly in many different investigations where we don't have the resources, both financial, both technical, and the ability to cross state lines or even out of our jurisdiction to look for the worst of the worst criminals, to apprehend those folks, to help us find missing persons. So it's not simply just about if there is one federal agency or one particular aspect that you're concerned with, we're happy to look at that. But the United States Marshal Service, they've helped us tremendously. After 9/11, we relied heavily on the resources of the federal government to assist us in getting up to speed and conducting investigations into terrorism and things like that. As you know, crimes occur over the internet and people are extremely able to cross jurisdictional lines before we've even had the report of a crime. So that's where our partnerships with other law enforcement agencies are very vital. So I would just throw caution out there and say we just need to proceed very carefully before we say, hey, you know what, we're going to keep Prince William County just Prince William and keep everybody else out. So I appreciate the opportunities to have those discussions and through the jail board and other places, because I think it's important for us to flesh those out before we absolutely say, hey, this is bad, we need to stop it. So I will give a shout out to some of our federal partners because they do help us on a very routine basis. And I'm talking about things about gang-related murders and others that even extend outside of the country, because people can flee our jurisdiction very quickly and they can be out of the country very quickly. And so we need their help bringing them back and bringing them to justice. So I'm just going to push back just a little bit on that.
And if I can just respond very quickly, I mean, I agree that it absolutely has to be done on a case-by-case basis. I would throw in addition to the other federal partners you mentioned, things like National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. You just can't match the federal resources available for stuff like that. And that's an organization that tracks abused children, but that includes child pornography and trafficking. And so it's something that is vital, and I get it. I agree that it has to be done case by case. I believe also that there are federal partners that have been demonstrated to be completely unreliable, and ultimately, after a period of investigating all of it, the county is going to want to say no. But I agree it needs to be done carefully and thoughtfully and with an open discussion about this stuff, and it shouldn't be done in a mechanical way.
Thank you for that, Major Harman and Ms. Lennox. Mr. Torres, we haven't heard from you in a little while in this conversation. Do you want to have anything to add before we move on?
I'm going to make 2 points, separate points. The first point would be related to Sudley and the mutual aid memorandums or agreements that police have in the area. Those are very necessary. Those are the way of supplementing in particular situations the resources that you may be lacking. There's no doubt about that. My point would be, but when you enter into those agreements and in fact you're executing on those agreements in any place, the local jurisdiction, in this case Prince William County, has to make sure that they have control over what's going on with their partners, because otherwise you have people from different agencies with different cultures that may be rogue in a little bit and then mess the situation a little bit up to what the Prince William County Police Department would have liked happened. So one thing that is very important in when you're executing these mutual aid agreements is that the entity in charge is the Prince William County Police, and the other ones are assisting. So that is clear. Maybe that didn't happen in that particular time at the beginning of that place, but I know that that's the way it should be, and I know that the police department understands that that's the way that it should be. The other thing has to do with cooperation with federal agencies. It is important to have cooperation with federal agencies, and the mayor has given a number of instances and areas in which it is very legitimate that we have a level of cooperation. But I think that local governments must be smart in how they cooperate. Cooperation can go from 0 to 100 and can be from whatever the feds want to nothing or very little. And we have to be the ones that determine what is the level of cooperation that is appropriate for Prince William County, that protects our community and at the same time builds the trust in the community that we need to be built. We had an experience on the jail board with 287G. We discussed that. We did not go ahead with that program. But to that extent, now we have to shift the debate in what will be the next relationship that we're going to have with them. If you see what they would like that we do 287G without having it. From our perspective, we have to be how far we're going to go and build the trust without putting our citizens in jeopardy here and build community, because I can tell you one thing, one of every 4 people walking these streets is Hispanic. And within the Hispanic community, every single Hispanic, including myself, know an undocumented immigrant or have been related to an undocumented immigrant at any point in our time. Either they're our friends, have worked for us, are members of our families. You know, we and whatever is done to them, it is done to us. You know, in that sense. And I know that that's the biggest thorn that we have with the Hispanic community. And until we show, it's not them to show, until we show them that we have some kind of, we have recognized that we will cooperate with ICE, but we will cooperate in our terms, not on their terms, the thing will not get better.
Thank you for that, Mr. Torres. Just want to add to that, you know, so the 287G agreement, as folks watching online can see, has been a very big hot button issue in this county for a little bit over a decade from when it was first enacted. And as was stated, you know, a couple of months back, our jail board finally voted to end that agreement, well, actually the beginning of this past month, I should say. I always argued that I was skeptical of us using our local tax dollars to enforce federal immigration law. Obviously, there's folks with a lot of different perspectives on this, and we continue to talk about our relationships with agencies of all types. So I appreciate all of you engaging in that. What I would just add to that commentary is, as a lot of folks know, in that jail board meeting in question, where the jail board voted to end the agreement, outgoing Chief Barry Bernard even said that he had concerns about the level of trust that was fostered in the community by that 287G agreement. So he was already even then sort of questioning its role in our community. And that's what we want to do with these programs and, you know, our partnerships with our law enforcement partners. We want to make sure that there's, obviously we give our law enforcement all the resources they need to keep our public safe. At the same time, we need to make sure that our community trusts our law enforcement officers. And so that's part of the reason why we're having this conversation. So I appreciate all of you, our panelists, having this conversation with me about this. The next question was sent to me over one of the chats. And this is actually something that Major Harman might be able to answer for us. Are people allowed to film an arrest or a situation that's occurring with the police if they are in a safe distance? And what is the protocol for that sort of situation?
So yes, people are allowed to film an arrest. You must do it without interfering with the arrest process itself. So if you are in a position where you're doing an arrest and you're not standing in the middle of traffic, endangering yourself or others, if you were, we would ask you to step up, you know, on a sidewalk or something like that. But as long as it allows enough space for our officers to affect the arrest process or to conduct their investigation, you're absolutely allowed to do that if you're in the public. If you're in somebody's private home, that's up to that homeowner. And the same thing if you're, you know, in a business, that's up to the business owner. We don't have anything to say about that.
Sure, thank you for that, Major Harman. And is there sort of any nuances there if the arrest or the detainment is happening inside of a public building, for example, or is that sort of still treated like in a public space?
No, as long as they're allowed to film, there's no restriction on that. They just have to be at a safe distance so as not to interfere with the arrest process or the investigation.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, that was a sort of a direct question that folks just had, because obviously in the age of social media, we have a lot of folks that have camera phones that are filming things that happen to sort of make sure everyone sees incidents from different perspectives. Just to go into that a little bit, and Major Harman talked a little bit and alluded to it earlier, we do have a body-worn camera policy in Prince William County. I was proud to work with Reverend Jose Bailey, Chief Bernard, and then Deputy Chief Thomas on that project back in 2017. Since then, you know, we had a lot of citizen input on that policy, making it as very much a transparent process as possible to make sure that we are making sure that on both sides, people are doing the right thing, because we know that the body-worn cameras are a good way to sort of video some of the activity that's going on, the interaction between police officers, but we also know they're a great tool to the officers themselves. So when there's a sort of a dispute on how an incident went down, there is a body-worn camera there, that footage there, that helps add another perspective. That being said, did anyone else want to talk about body-worn cameras before we move to a follow-up question?
I'll just say body-worn cameras just creates a transparent process. It helps the police officer as well as the person that's being potentially arrested or detained or questioned.
And Supervisor
Thank
Boddye,
you
I'm
for
just
that.
going to throw in a budget
Yep.
plug toward you. We don't have the cash to pay for body-worn cameras for all of our staff. As you can see, I don't have one. And you could argue that I don't need one. However, our uniform staff that are frontline folks, they all have them, but our detectives don't, and a whole bunch of other people that work on our department. So I'm just going to throw that budget plug in as you think about FY22. If you like the body-worn camera program, you know, throw a couple dollars toward us to expand that program for everybody.
No, heard loud and clear. Thank you for that, Major Harman. Obviously, we especially in this day and age, we're having a lot of conversations about funding and making sure that folks have the right resources, and also making sure, to a point that Ms. Lennox made earlier, that we're also providing officers with wraparound services and the tools they need to respond to any manner of calls, whether it's mental health, substance abuse, those things. So that's a holistic conversation. We want to make sure that we're empowering folks to do the right job. So understood loud and clear. So to go to some more of the questions, we have one in the chat here that just popped over from YouTube. With all respect, Ms. Lennox, I don't think you can expect Prince William County Police to renegotiate their relationship with all other law enforcement agencies on a case-by-case basis, can you?
So I was responding to that via the chat, but I'll just pipe up and say it. Look, a lot of these agreements are policies, like the cooperation at the ADC with ICE. These are policies that are set by governing bodies. They're set by the ADC board, or the jail board, or by the Boddye County Supervisors, for that matter. And if the governing body or the community or the citizens through these governing bodies or entities decide that we want our law enforcement to change the policy, then just to take a really extreme example that's recent, the ADC board determines whether or not, you know, the policy of cooperation with ICE. If the ADC board decides to change that and to direct the ADC to stop cooperating with ICE in some way, then the jail board, or the jail has to comply with that. That's a change in policy. They enforce the policy as set by the ADC board. If Colonel Miletus decided he didn't want to enforce it, then the jail board would remove him. And it's their authority to do it. And so this is the nature of democratic governance. These entities work for us as communities, and our communities are represented through their governing bodies, like our Boddye County Supervisors, like our legislature. We appoint people to these positions, and so we get to make the policy. Hopefully, this is a county that is full of people that care deeply about their communities and understand that we want the people that serve us to be successful in that service. So of course we're going to come back to our law enforcement and say, tell us why you think you need to continue to do this. We're going to listen. We're going to invest in getting the evidence that documents why we think one position or another is better. We're not going to just do it in a fit of pique because we just don't like what's happening. We're going to investigate it and listen to all sides. But at the end of the day, if the community, through the jail board or through the Boddye County Supervisors, through some other entity, say, we don't want to do this policy anymore and we're directing you to change it, then the public servants that execute those policies have to follow through on it. So it's not like I'm expecting the police to renegotiate all the relationships. saying that as a community, we can say to them, here's what we want you to do. Here's what we expect from you in policing and in keeping us safe. You know, you tell us how you're going to execute that, how you're going to do it. Best example in the world is the struggles that Chief Dean had in 2006, 2007, 2008 with the current Board of Supervisors, where he came back to them and said, what you're telling us policy-wise you want us to do is going to be a nightmare. You don't want to really do this. Let me show you why. And Chief Dean spent a year putting together for the Board of County Supervisors then existing why their version of cooperation with ICE was a bad idea. It was a two-way street. Board of County Supervisors said one thing, the law enforcement community said another, and ultimately the law enforcement community changed the Board of County Supervisors' mind to some degree about what ought to happen. So we're going to communicate, we're going to hear each other, we're going to have these conversations like we're doing right now. And at the end of the day, we as the Democratic, as the Democratic body are going to have our elected officials tell our public servants what we want them to do. How's that for a civics lesson? Sorry, I get on a soapbox about that kind of stuff.
No, it was a question that was directed right towards you, so you have the floor. Does anyone have anything they would like to add to that?
I'll just add, I appreciate a thoughtful process, because if we change it and then we change it again, it makes it extremely difficult to ensure that our officers are carrying out those wishes. So if you could just go ahead and go through the process before you direct us to do anything, that would be most appreciated.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and I just want to highlight that. Thank you for that, Major Harman. Obviously, we want to be very thoughtful as we negotiate and talk through these processes, and over time our understanding of how these processes work into something that Mr. Torres said earlier, how they're implemented also change over time, because how something was envisioned may not be how it's being implemented by folks. So it's always important for us to have those sorts of conversations. And just to touch one last thing, Tracy, to something you said before we move on, one of the questions is, in terms of the jail board and their relationship with Colonel Miletus as sort of the arbiter of that, do they have the ability to remove Colonel Miletus even though he works for the sheriff?
Colonel Miletus is appointed by, serves at the pleasure of the jail board. He serves at the pleasure of the jail board. He is not the sheriff. A lot of people misunderstand the relationship between the sheriff's office and the jail board. And the sheriff is an elected constitutional officer, and he has control over all of the sheriff's deputies that control the courthouse, provide security to the courthouse, and serve civil process. There may be some other minor duties, but those are the major duties of the sheriff's office, are those two things. The jail, the administration of the jail, is actually completely separate from that. The sheriff, as has a permanent seat, must be on the jail board, but he does not direct the jail board, and he doesn't even control the jail. He, like I said, his staff and the jail board staff are separate entities, and Colonel Miletus serves at the pleasure of the jail board.
Appreciate that. And just so everyone's aware also, currently Sheriff Glenn Hill is the chairman of the jail board, but that isn't a necessity either. It's just the folks obviously respect his service, and our jail board elected him to be reelected as chairman this past term, but that won't necessarily always be the case. So that could also be a way in which folks may be sort of looking at those relationships there.
And Kenny, can I just say, to follow on to that, right after the jail board at the June meeting decided not to renew 287G, and killed off 287G effectively, we simultaneously, the next thing we did was elected Glenn Hill as chairman of the jail board, because he's been an institution in law enforcement in Prince William County for, I don't even know, 40 years? I don't know, a long time. And so we, the next step was we elected him chairman for another year. So I think there's a lot of respect in all of this. He disagreed with us, but at the end of it, we all looked around and said, Glenn Hill should be the chairman of this board, even though we just voted down something that he asked for us to do. So we're trying super hard to keep these conversations wide open, and all the respect for one another is driving all of this for us.
Thank you for that, Ms. Lennox. And yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Obviously, we come to these conversations from a wide variety of lived experiences, perspectives, and frankly, where we want to see things go. But it's my hope that just as you just highlighted, you were able to have a vigorous debate about the program with Sheriff Hill. The vote didn't go the way that he may have wanted, but then you turned and you paid that respect to him by re-electing him as the jail board chairman. And we experience those sorts of dynamics on the Board of Supervisors all the time, where all of the lowercase Democratic bodies are like that. We have disagreements, even within folks that align with usually our values, but we can have those disagreements and then all agree that we need to still have that mutual respect for each other and realize that we're all in this for the common good of the constituents that we all are trying to serve. So the last question before I get into the wrap up is for Mr. Torres. But obviously once we hear his response, people can sort of jump in on this. The question goes, Raul, what might it look like as a community to define how they will cooperate with ICE on their terms? What might those terms be? And I believe that's in direct response to something you were talking about earlier in terms of how we as a community can define our relationships with law enforcement.
Now we'll be having in the near future. That's part of the conversation we're having now and in the near future. For me, for example, it is very important in terms of cooperation with ICE, for example. It's very important that we do not allow members of the Prince William community that might be undocumented to fall in a wide web for misdemeanor crimes or for minor things, and then be subject to deportation and what deportation means for the families that they leave behind. That's permanent separation from families. And to the extent that we cooperate for that end, we are certainly cooperating for the separation of the families, even if that is not our intention. But we are part of the process that ends up in that separation. So one of the things that I'm advocating in the jail board and that we are having conversations about is how do we get all this people charged with misdemeanors out of the web of ICE? And there are ways, legal ways of doing that, because we have opinions from the attorney generals. We have, a cooperation with federal agencies is not law mandated, is a practice, is a culture of law enforcement to cooperate with each other. There's a reason, but it's not that we're going to violate any law because we are having a level of cooperation that is not, full cooperation. ICE puts detainers, because that's their business, on every single undocumented alien that enters the adult detention center. And they have said that, and they said it to us in our previous meeting in June. And they will not get down from that horse. So what that means is that their web, if we notify them of their release, if we honor those detainers and hold these persons for them to pick them up for these menial crimes that can be, driving unsuspended, that can be anything that can happen to any American citizen. And the consequence for the American citizen will be one, or for a permanent resident, and for undocumented immigrant will be permanent separation from their families. So what I'm trying is to put some humanity into the law and some kind of, we can set some parameters here that make sense. And then they concentrate on the felons, on the gang members, on the rapists, on regardless if they are citizens, undocumented or permanent residents. Let's concentrate for ICE purposes on these undocumented immigrants that commit serious crimes. And then let's deal with them in a different way. That's kind of where we are having the conversation about.
Thank you for that, Raul. Did anyone have anything they wanted to add to that?
I shared this on the jail board meeting, but because we have a different group that perhaps is tuning in, I will just throw this caution out in that if you are the victim of that crime, it might not be so menial, because domestic violence is a misdemeanor crime. Assault and battery is a misdemeanor crime. Many times, crimes that were charged as a felony are pled down to misdemeanors, and that's how folks get into jail. So if you are the victim of that crime, I just have a little bit of difficulty saying that, well, that doesn't necessarily matter. So I just want to throw that out and just be a little cautious with saying that they're menial, because they are meaningful if you are that victim.
Mr. Torres, did you have anything to add to that?
A person is arrested by the police, even if it is for domestic violence. Let's say that is for domestic violence on a misdemeanor charge. They are arrested, they're prosecuted, they're found guilty, and they have a punishment. It could be days in jail, they could be, community service, whatever the judge decides the sentence that it would be. That's what everybody should get. That's the punishment. What I still I'm kind of see as a little bit inhuman is if you're undocumented, adding to that, breaking a family, breaking it permanently. And that's what we're trying to avoid here. Nobody, when I say menial, is compared to felonies. I'm not saying menial compared to, there are different misdemeanors, but I'm talking about misdemeanors. The victims will be redressed because the person will be punished. But after the punishment that you pay the price, that's when actually, you're taken by ICE and separated from your family. And that's what if it's for a felony, I think it's okay. But if it's just for a misdemeanor that has a maximum of 1 year in jail, I think that the punishment does not fit the crime, put it that way.
Thank you for that. And I do think that part of this conversation is about how, in some regards, like you said, Mr. Torres, there does seem to be sometimes a two-tier justice system. And not only when it comes to undocumented folks, we see that in Black and Brown communities, regardless of their documentation status throughout the country. So I think that we do have to have those tough conversations about folks that have, frankly, different outcomes in the justice system, unnecessarily so in some cases, just based on their status or the color of their skin or where they come from. Christy, I saw you just unmuted yourself.
I was going to say, just from a historical perspective, these practices took place back decades ago in the Black community during Reconstruction, where the similar type of behavior, Black men or women would be stopped for something very minor, a minor infraction, so that they would be sent to jail, so that then they could do free labor in the fields. So from being enslaved to now you're in the prison system, and you're still picking cotton or doing those type of activities. So from a historical perspective, those same type of practices are currently still taking place, as far as what Mr. Torres was saying. Know your history.
Sure. Yep. Tracy, did you have anything to add to that before we wrap up?
Not really. I mean, I think that this is a conversation, as you can see, that is going to continue to happen. There are very strong feelings on both sides of it. I tend to come down on Mr. Torres's side, but I also think that it's really important for us to have the conversation, and then we'll see where we come out in the next couple of months.
Absolutely. And to get back to that a little bit, I do think that some folks, we do obviously have a vested interest in making sure that the victims of these crimes are that they are restored as well, and that the folks who have harmed them are held accountable. I think everyone on this call can agree with that. So we cannot forget the victims in this conversation. Mm-hmm. At the same time, we do have to make sure that justice is equal for everyone. So you have the victims who are the objects of some of these crimes, but obviously we also have to make sure that, especially when there are certain victimless crimes, especially, that we're not having unequal outcomes to folks just on the basis of the color of their skin. And we could get into a whole other conversation about that as well, in terms of how our justice system treats folks who are in health crises, substance abuse, some of these victimless issues that still disproportionately affect folks throughout our society. We have 5 minutes left. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We had a set end time of 8 o'clock. So I want to just go around, starting in reverse order with you, Ms. Lennox, and we'll go back to Christy at the end here. Final thoughts and, very quickly how you think we can continue to have these conversations and really forge a shared path into healing and really coming to a shared understanding of how we're in this together. So yeah, Tracy, you're up first, if I wasn't clear about that. And you're muted. There you go.
Sorry about that. There was a message popped up on my screen right as you were talking. So so please let someone else answer and then come back to me in just a minute.
Sure, absolutely. Mr. Torres, that means you're
Okay. My thoughts are that Prince William is transforming itself, is becoming something that is what I call the new Prince William, a Prince William that is completely different than the Prince William that was 6 months ago. And the changes that we are trying to make in Prince Williams are not changes that will depend on who is elected now or who would be the chief of police tomorrow. It actually changes that touches the structures of the way we do things in a way that they endure as part of the fabric of how Prince William will do business in the future. Our criminal justice system should be reformed, not for the next 4 years, should be reformed forever. It should be reformed structurally so it serves this community and the generations to come. And the same way, we have to tackle all the systemic issues in a way that they endure, that our things will not be changed by anybody else, by a new politician that comes and changes things. We want things to change in a way that serves everybody. And for that, it's true, we need to have difficult conversations. We have to get data and base our decisions on data. And we have to have also looking and trying to get some consensus in our society about, in our community, on where do we want to go really. And it's kind of a mix of law enforcement with humanity. It's kind of a system, economic system that works for everybody, or a criminal justice system that works for everybody. And that's where we're going at. And maybe that looks like a little bit idealistic, but if there is no idealistic, there's no way to get anywhere.
Thank you for that, Mr. Torres. Major Harman?
Sure. Sorry, I was reading the chat. There was a question up there, but I'll have to put on my glasses in order to be able to read that. I appreciate the opportunity to engage in dialogue because I think it's important for us to consider all aspects of the criminal justice system and how that affects how we police in the community. We try to be as transparent and give as much information as we possibly can provide to the public on how we go about policing in this county, how we approach our job, what our values are, what our former leaders' visions are, and what our next leader's vision is going to be. And so we invite people all the time to come out and engage with us, have meaningful conversations, and ask us questions, because that's really how we develop an understanding of not only what we have and where we are, but where the public wants to take us. Because as was mentioned before, a lot of our policies and procedures are set by our governing body. Some of them are set by laws, and some of them are set a long time ago in the Constitution. So we have a whole mix of rules and regulations that we have to follow. And I would just ask that if we can have those meaningful conversations and a thoughtful process before we make a decision, it would help us to ensure that we are carrying out, whichever group it is, your wishes and how we police in this community. So thanks again for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Major Harman, for that. And again, thank you for your service in keeping our community safe. Tracy, did you want us to go back to you, or would you like me to go to Christy first?
I'd love to just make a quick point. I personally, one of my primary goals in terms of criminal justice reform over the next couple of years is to shift some of the job of responding to crises in the community out of the police department's hands and into other professionals' hands. I think it's good for the police department to not require them to deal with every single social ill that crops up in our communities, and we've just shoved more and more onto the police department every year, and we need to start thinking about how to bring that back. I would point out that the Prince William County Board of County Supervisors, I believe, just recently authorized funding for three different positions for people from the Department of Social Services to go out on calls in mental health cases. And the idea is to start creating situations where more and more often you have a social worker whose specialization is in mental health to go out not on calls for 911 service, but preliminary calls before there's a 911 call for health checks and for mental health checks for folks that will help them to get more comfortable with the police not just showing up in crises situations, having social workers show up and get to know these folks that have mental health issues that may be in crisis that require a 911 call. That's what this county needs, is improvement and expansion of programs like that, so that we take away from the police department some of the things that we've foisted off onto them over the years, that there may be other areas of the county that just would be better suited to serve those populations. There's my pitch, but that's what my goal is over the next year or two. It's going to require commitments financially. It's going to require flexibility from our law enforcement, which I think they have, and it's going to require a joined community endeavor. Like this requires everybody, faith groups, social services, volunteer organizations, the public defender's office, Commonwealth Store, everybody is going to have to be involved in it.
Agreed 100%. And I think that gets back to something that Raul said earlier, which is how we can partner keeping people safe and law enforcement with humanity, and bringing that really intertwined with each other to make sure that we're treating people with mutual respect and their human dignity, and how, like you said, we're not saddling so much on the back of our law enforcement officers who are already responsible for so much in our community. Christy, let's take it away. You're our closer.
Okay. I would be remiss as a community leader and activist if I did not bring up these three important points. That's one, if you have not filled out your census, please fill your census out. It takes no more than 5 to 10 minutes to do so. Every person needs to be counted. So please do that, so we will have fair representation with our resource allocation and our budget adjustments here in Prince William County. Second, please register to vote if you have not already done so by October 13th for the upcoming general election, November 3rd. Go to vote.elections.virginia.gov, and you can get all your information there. Also, a really good resource to get information about voting in Prince William County is if you text PWC Votes, so PWC VOTES, to 94253. They will update you with deadlines and due dates of the voting process. And last but not least, because I am with the Prince William branch of NAACP, we are still looking for people who want to engage in the community. And so we're seeking that membership from folks. If you are all about civil rights and against racial discrimination, we need you, we need your skill set, and we need your time and passion. So please feel free to come and join us. We meet on the third Tuesdays of every month. Currently, we are virtual, so that makes it even better. And even once we go back into the facility, you can still do it online, because we want to continue to live in a just and thriving society, and we will be able to do that as long as we are able to hold everyone accountable. Thank you for allowing me to be on this panel. I appreciate it, and I appreciate all the panel guests.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Christy. And just to highlight the NAACP for a second, we welcome anyone who has that cause for racial justice in their heart. So we have white allies, we have Hispanic allies, we have folks of all colors and creeds who help serve on the NAACP. Some of our members of our executive committee that Christy mentioned earlier are white. So it's not one of those things where it's just for Black folks. Obviously, we want to uplift Black voices and voices of color, because it's our fight for justice that we're moving towards it as the NAACP. But we welcome everyone to be part of that fight. So I wanted to wrap this up by saying thank you so much for all of our panelists, Ms. Blackman, Major Harman, Mr. Torres, Ms. Lennox. Thank you so much for taking this time out of your busy Thursday evenings to have this conversation with me. This is obviously an ongoing conversation. We have a lot of folks in the chat that have asked additional questions we don't have time for. My staff will be compiling those and emailing them out to all the appropriate folks so we can keep this dialogue going. And to that point, this is the first of many town halls like this we're going to be having, because we had over 70 people watching online today. And that was only with a couple of weeks of planning. I'm sure that folks who got engaged in that are going to be telling their friends and their family throughout our community about this really important conversation. And we will not be able to fix these issues or work through them in one night. I wish we could say after an hour and a half that we solved it, guys, we got this, we're done. But we know that, as Major Harman said, and as a couple other folks said, this is going to take a lot of thoughtful, methodical, evidence-based, data-driven conversations to really come together and create the kind of community and relationship between law enforcement, our activists, our justice system, our public defenders, everyone, so we're making sure that we're moving the ball forward with justice for all in our hearts and not just for a chosen few. That's it for us, everyone. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for tuning in with us tonight. If you have any other further questions, concerns, or issues, or if you're one of our constituents and you'd like to reach out to get more information of how to get involved or about content you want to see us have these conversations about, please reach out to my office. My staff and I are at your service, and we are here to have these tough conversations, because that's the only way we can move forward together as a community. That's it for us, everyone. Thank you again. And great job, everyone, for everything you do. Great job to my staff who continues to be able to organize a really well-done conversation, get everyone together. And with that, we will say good night. Good night, everyone. Thank you for that.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
All right.
Bye.